It's Feisty Fridays again, and there's lots to talk about. Lots of things on my head. On my head? No, not on my head. In my head. This week, one of the things that I really have been wrestling with is how much I struggle in this area and don't always admit it. And I just came off of a conference. And so I know, when I'm in a room and I'm on stage with lots of people, there is this overwhelming desire to be liked. And I don't think as speakers and as teachers and as leaders and as collaborators and team members, we talk enough about this because there's nothing wrong with wanting to be liked. And before any of you jump on top of this subject, I really want to be clear about what I think about. I'm not suggesting that I or leaders should be rude with people, should be dismissive, arrogant, or uncaring. So I'm not looking at the opposite of to try to be liked. I really want to talk about the desire to behave in such a way that people will like what you're saying. And the idea that when we do that, we actually exchange something for approval. And the only reason I know this is because I've done it myself. And I'm tempted to do it quite often because there's been moments in my career where I knew the next conversation that I was going to be in was going to be difficult and also that it needed to happen. I knew that I needed to set a new boundary, for instance, or that a really tough decision would need to be made and people would not be happy about it. And just like I'm doing right now, I have hesitated in those moments. I wish I could tell you it's because I didn't know what to do, but actually, it was because I knew someone in the room wouldn't like me for it. Maybe you've experienced that too. It's so human to want to be liked. I know that I have delayed giving feedback to someone because I didn't want to hurt their feelings, even though as a leader, I recognized that they needed to be informed. I have addressed poor performance in others because I didn't want to damage the relationship I had with them. And there have been times where I have said yes when I actually really didn't want to. But I just didn't want to disappoint someone. In fact, I do that one a lot. And I don't think it's weakness. I think it's human. It's human to want people to like you. But when it comes to building a pattern over and over and over again, I think it encroaches into a leadership problem. And I'm guilty of this because it is so much fun to be well liked and well received. It is so wonderful to get positive feedback. And one of the biggest misconceptions I think about leadership is that if we're too kind and too supportive, um, you know, and keep everybody happy, it will win at something, right? Like that there's some sort of winning. There's no winning. There's no winning. There's nothing to win. Being kind, supportive, and having boundaries and maintaining that leadership and that authority, that's so important because humans can see right through the facade. I certainly can. And we don't want them to see that yeah, aren't being our genuine selves. Because if they push at that, our leadership crumbles. And leadership, by virtue of itself, calls us to make really difficult choices. And those choices will always create two sides, the winners, the losers. And every single priority that's in front of us can create something that doesn't get prioritized, which means there's always the left out. And all of the decisions that we make are going to incite disagreement somewhere, if not initially, certainly at some point. It's just the reality of leading people and leading ourselves. And it's taken me, and it continues to take me, energy and effort to accept responsibility for those outcomes. And also to accept responsibility for the disappointment that my decision making can create. It's really uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable because I think it feels like we should be able to be well liked and make great decisions. And when we really genuinely care for people, it feels like the opposite of caring for them when we create discomfort. But the irony is that leaders who work really hard to avoid that discomfort end up in the long run creating more of it. So think about what happens when you don't have that tough conversation about accountability. When you leave it, what continues to happen? That person continues to not meet with your expectations. Um, Even far worse, if you don't address the lack of accountability, that poor behavior continues to go unaddressed. I know in my experience, I have ruined the trust of an entire team just by not addressing the behavior of one person on it. It's too costly. It's too costly to only want to make decisions or make moves so that we can still be liked. And I think a lot of our organizations allow this to happen because we really don't want to do the work that is uncomfortable. And I think in some cases, I know for me, I hadn't done enough of the accountability up front to see the benefit, to experience the benefit of it. And as a result, I've created teams that have actually lacked a lot of respect and trust, both for my leadership, but for each other, when really I could have completely avoided that. And, leadership is about helping people feel stable. And that doesn't mean having all the answers. It means having a way through and agreeing to go on ahead. And when we do that, we help reduce the anxiety of those who are following us. But one of the greatest lessons that I had to learn is that leadership um, isn't about perfection. I can admit to my lack of imperfections as a leader. And as long as I'm consistently showing up and being honest and being clear, that kind of behavior, man, even when it makes people feel uncomfortable, if I can sit with them in the discomfort, if I can stay there, that actually can build trust and respect. And a lot of us see leaders do this poorly. We see leaders state something that they know is going to make people in the room uncomfortable. And then what do? What does their behavior show? They leave the room. They just walk out. They walk out to make the next decision. And they don't think about the emotional cost and the discomfort that their decisions already created. I think great leaders stay in the room and hold that discomfort. You know, Instead of being tempted to soften the message or to dance around the issue, great leaders will speak very directly, but they also won't leave the conversation abruptly. They'll stay, not even saying anything, just being prepared to still be engaged in the room and engaged in the conversation. And that kind of leadership, that immediately impresses upon others that there's something there to be respected. It's that person isn't avoiding the discomfort. They're actually remaining and with kindness, holding the honesty, respecting the truth, and creating accountability, both for themselves as a leader in the room and for others. This, this is where we need to do our biggest work because we as leaders need desperately to think about the impact we have on the lives of others. The leaders who've had the greatest impact on my life, they weren't the leaders that I liked all the time. In fact, some of them demonstrated to me really bad leadership traits, but in the authenticity of them being themselves, I learned still to recognize, to trust, and to respect what they were trying to do. Many of those same leaders frustrated me immensely. They even challenged me. I've had people speak words into my life that I just flatly refused to accept for years. But gradually, those statements began to ring truer. They created accountability for me. And in a few instances, leaders told me things that I really needed to hear. I don't think it was because they enjoyed making me uncomfortable. I think it's because they cared enough to tell me the truth as they saw it. And those individuals, those leaders, those people, all these years later, I remember them. I remember them differently, not because they made me feel comfortable. In fact, it was the opposite. It was because they told me the truth, and that truth supported my growth. And that's a big distinction. Growth is hard. Growth means stretching. Learning means being willing to admit that you don't know it already. So this week, I am thinking a lot about that lesson. I'm also really hopeful that we can spark a conversation around here and think about the fact that it's okay to want to be liked. But it's important to ask ourselves, are there conversations we are avoiding right now because we are trying to preserve the approval of others? Asking myself, are there decisions that I am not making right now because I think other people won't like me if I make them? Maybe I have boundaries that I have not clearly established that I need to. These are the questions I'm asking myself. There are also questions you can ask yourself because leadership is not about being universally liked. It's about being consistently trustworthy. And people may not always agree with me, and they may not enjoy my decisions, and they may not always like what I have to say, including you on Feisty Fridays. But I do believe people should always know where I stand. And so me sharing my truth is important in a world that feels increasingly uncertain. So let's choose clarity this week. Let's think about how we can be clearer in our leadership and not think about whether our leadership practices are always making everyone happy. Because although it's important for us to care for people and to respect them and to consider them, if our leadership depends on everyone else liking us, our leadership actually belongs to them and not to us. So that's what I'm thinking about. Have a great week, and we'll see you next Friday.